Yes, good morning. Welcome back to the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. We've had a 1 week hiatus to recharge the batteries, but it's fantastic to be back bringing you five of the biggest stories making waves in the world of sport. And tell you what, they happen live as we're about to go to air. We're going to go to a massive story first and foremost, which is breaking really as we sit here. My name's Pete Fairbairn. I'm your host, and today I'm joined from Melbourne by Natalie Yoannidis. How are you, Nat?
Yeah, I'm good, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back on the show, and neither of us could really believe our eyes with what's transpired. And we're going to start over in the US at Flushing Meadows with the US Open and the news that the overwhelming men's singles favourite Novak Djokovic has been disqualified from the tournament. He was in the first set of his match in the fourth round there at the US Open. He hit a tennis ball which has hit a lineswoman in the throat, and he has been subsequently defaulted, disqualified from the match and the tournament, and will play no further part. Of course, this is a huge story. We know there's no Roger Federer. We know there's no Rafa Nadal in this tournament, and many saw it as an opportunity for Novak to catch up in that race for the most all-time singles titles. Now, this is a huge story in the world of sport.
Pete, I'm genuinely still in shock at the moment. I cannot believe that this has happened. When you read an article that says Novak Djokovic has been disqualified, you expect it to be a really violent incident. I thought that there was going to be something quite shocking. Actually, watching the incident, it doesn't look as bad as you would assume. It certainly doesn't look like he's done it on purpose. And there actually wasn't as much force in that ball as we've certainly seen in the past. It seems that he's just gotten really unlucky at the moment with that incident. But overall, I think that this is the biggest story in sport, aside from coronavirus and events being cancelled and so on and so forth. This is the biggest story in sport this year. He was the overwhelming favourite. He won the Cincinnati Masters leading into it. He's had a couple of hiccups, but he's always managed to pull himself out of it without Roger Federer there, without Novak Djokovic, and a lot of those other really big, without Rafael Nadal. He was the overwhelming favourite to take this out, and this has really just thrown this tournament on its head. I am genuinely in shock.
Yeah, a couple of key points to look back on to contextualise this as well. Obviously Novak Djokovic, we know that he's had the Adria Tour, which he put on in his native Balkans during the COVID pandemic, and resulted in him and many other players testing positive for coronavirus. So he's been slammed pretty widely for that. We know that he and his family have made some pretty controversial comments around coronavirus vaccines. We know that on the eve of the US Open, he's announced a Breakaway Players Association, which doesn't appear to have the support of the entire tennis playing fraternity and doesn't include or incorporate female players. We know that with the really strict kind of guidelines around coronavirus in New York at the moment, that he's one of the very few players not staying in a very drab, boring hotel environment, and that he's rented a luxurious kind of place to ensure that he stays in tune with the rules set in place by the tournament organisers. So he's not the most popular guy going into this tournament as it stands. However, to your point, what seems a fairly innocuous incident, to see a true champion of the game disqualified from a tournament on that basis, it's a disappointing way to see him go. Do you think I'm going to compare him, let's say, with Serena Williams. She's probably the female equivalent in terms of how dominant she's been in the sport over recent years. She's had a lot of issues and arguments with lines people and umpires and the like. Some quite intentional behaviour that has never seen her actually kicked out of the tournament like this. Do you think the punishment is fair?
I think that you would have to question whether or not some of those controversial incidents leading into this tournament have played some sort of role in this decision, because as we mentioned, it did seem quite innocuous. There was not a lot of force in that ball, and he certainly hasn't done it on purpose. So you'd have to wonder whether or not there is something else at play here. You've already mentioned Novak Djokovic has been so controversial, of course, with all the things surrounding coronavirus, some of his views regarding anti-vax and so forth. And then, of course, like you mentioned, that breakaway Players Association, which basically broke on the eve of this tournament. So he's certainly been a controversial figure in 2020 as Novak Djokovic. And you just do get the idea that maybe some of that has fed into it. You mentioned Serena Williams, of course. She had that very infamous incident where she actually threatened to shove a ball down a linesperson's throat. Now, that seems beyond comprehension, let's be perfectly honest, and seems so much more serious than something like this, which has just happened. And like we mentioned, looks to be accidental really in nature, whereas Serena Williams was very forceful in what she said, despite being quite angry. So that seems sufficiently worse. She was docked points. I think she was fined over $82,000 for that incident as well, but she certainly wasn't eliminated, but she wasn't disqualified from the tournament. This is just almost unprecedented. I can't remember seeing anything like this involving such a high profile player, not to be disqualified anyway, yes, to be penalised, but not. And really, it beggars belief at the moment.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of fallout from this one. Quite fortuitous timing that the Australians tennis expert Courtney Walsh will be joining us on the show tomorrow. So we look forward to getting the update from him at that time. And it is a story from Courtney Walsh that is our second story today, because there is still tennis going on at the US Open, and there's two Aussie hopes who are into the fourth round of the US Open. One of them, Jordan Thompson, it's the first time he's reached the second week of a major, and he's about to hit off relatively soon this morning against Croatian Borna Koric, but also Alex de Minaur. He's the 21-year-old. He's also the 21st seed. He'll be playing Canadian Vasek Popisil on Tuesday morning, looking to potentially set up a quarterfinal with Dominic Thiem, who I guess now would be the favourite to win the tournament. Nat, is this the Grand Slam which we see the true progression of Alex de Minaur? He's won a couple of matches against bigger, stronger opponents, which has been the knock on the kind of pint-sized youngster in the past. Is this the tournament we really see him break through?
I think we've seen Alex de Minaur really perform quite well at Grand Slams in the past, and of course at Davis Cups as well. So he's got so much talent. Whether or not he is able to progress too much further in this tournament, he hasn't played a lot of tennis this year, Pete. You've got to keep that in mind. I mean, no one's played a lot of tennis this year, but he didn't play in the Australian Open. He missed a lot of the Australian summer through injury. So he has really been behind the eight ball in that sense. If he'd been playing all year, you'd have to say that Alex de Minaur, the way that the field has opened up without Novak Djokovic there, would certainly be in a pretty good position. Of course, Dominic Thiem would have to be the overwhelming favourite at the moment. He's missed out at the Australian Open, really took Novak Djokovic pretty much all the way there in the final, which was a fantastic match. It's going to be difficult for de Minaur, but it's really been nice to see his progression, given that he hasn't played a lot of tennis and he has suffered quite a few injuries. And just quickly on Jordan Thompson as well, absolutely fantastic to see him through to the fourth round. A good chance against Borna Koric, who had a pretty tough five-setter. So fingers crossed we do see at least one of those Aussie boys progress to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, lovely article from Courtney Walsh. Some great quotes from de Minaur talking about how Jordan Thompson's been a bit of a big brother for him. And we've always loved in Australian tennis, we love it when some of our journeyman's not fair, because Jordan Thompson's a very, very good tennis player, but some of our less heralded tennis players perhaps, really have a big impact on the world stage. So we're all behind Jordan Thompson this morning. Our third story this morning, probably one you didn't enjoy reading as an Essendon fan, because your Bombers were pretty insipid yesterday, unfortunately, Nat, going down to Geelong. At halftime, it looked like some records might be broken, and 75-12, I think the score was at halftime. To Essendon's credit, they did tighten the screws a little bit in the second half, and kind of, I wouldn't say could hold their heads high, but certainly played to a higher standard after halftime. I don't want to talk too much about Essendon because we know that they're struggling. We know that they won't play finals, and they probably do need a rebuild. But I want to talk about Geelong because they've been absolutely superb for the last few weeks. Next week they play Richmond, which under normal circumstances, you're talking 75,000, 80,000 supporters at the G. Unfortunately, we won't see that. But You've got Patrick Dangerfield, who's finished top 10 in the Brownlow medal in each of the past 8 seasons, averaging 25 votes per season, which is just a phenomenal record. And you've got Gary Ablett, Joel Selwood coming back in just right at the business time for the Cats. Damien Barrett at AFL.com, gives us some of those stats today. Did this match illustrate just how good Geelong are and just what a premiership threat they could be in 2020?
I don't think that this match, you can't really read too much into this match because, as you already mentioned, Essendon were absolutely deplorable yesterday. They were just insipid. They didn't turn up, basically. From the second that they missed a goal in the first couple of minutes, you knew it was going to be a bad day for the Bombers. So I don't think that you can read too much into that performance from a Geelong perspective, but I will just say this, Geelong are the real deal. I know there's been a big knock on Geelong in previous seasons, having really good home and away seasons and then really failing to go the distance in finals, either going out in straight sets or just not being as impressive as they have been. But I think that this is a very different Geelong team this year. They have been fantastic. And I'll admit I was one of the doubters maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. But since then, I think that they probably deserve to be one of the favourites at the moment because they have been exceptional. They haven't done anything wrong. And that's despite missing the likes of Gary Ablett and Joel Selwood. It just goes to show how much depth they have in that side. Gary Rowan has really stood up for them this year. Of course, he came over from the Swans a couple of seasons ago, so he's been fantastic for them. But can we just talk about Tom Hawkins? Like a fine wine, just seems to be getting better with age, leading the Coleman at the moment. And I'm in awe of the way that Tom Hawkins plays at the moment. He's got to be one of the best one-on-one forwards in the competition. All Geelong have to do is just kick the ball to his vicinity and he will basically take that ball in a one-on-one contest probably 9 out of 10 times. He has just been so impressive. He just seems to be one of those players that are really taking 2020 on despite all the controversy and all the adversity, and I'm so impressed with how Geelong have gone.
Yeah, he's been superb, Tommy Hawkins. Charlie Dixon at Port Adelaide, another key forward to turn back the clock in 2020, and we know that there's a plethora of exciting young forwards, the King brothers, Aaron Norton, Eric Hipwood, and plenty of others, but there's a couple of old stages showing them the way. We thought at the start of the year that Geelong would have to go extremely hard at Jeremy Cameron as a free agent. I think that becomes less important as this season goes on. Our penultimate story today, really good news. You and I can't help but just declare our allegiances slightly here as a former employee of that football club and in your instance, somebody who spends a lot of time in that environment working from a media perspective. It's great news to see the Melbourne Rebels finally in Super Rugby finals. Yes, it's a different competition. Yes, they did it the hard way, scoring after the final whistle to win against the Western Force on Saturday to secure their maiden finals appearance. But they're in the finals for the first time ever, 10 years into the club's history, and they'll play the Queensland Reds up here on Saturday night. Tom Deason with the story in the Sydney Morning Herald, where Dave Vessels, Rebels head coach, says, I'm really proud of the boys for hanging in there. In previous years or situations, we wouldn't have hung in there and got the outcome. We stayed in the game and we fought our way back into it. Making the playoffs has been a bit of a mental hurdle for the team, and sometimes that's bigger than the actual game. Now that we've got that monkey off our back, I think there's a lot of good energy in the team, and the guys will play for the joy of winning rather than the fear of losing. Can the Melbourne Rebels spark an almighty upset against the informed Reds on Saturday?
I think that everyone in Melbourne certainly hopes that they can, Pete, because we've had a bit of bad news over the last few days, of course, with the lockdown going on here. Wow, the Rebels match, what a finish. It was incredible to watch. Of course, they had to win by 4 points to make it through to the finals. Interesting to hear Dave say that maybe it was a little bit of a mental hurdle for them because they've been really up and down in this competition. They've had some fantastic wins. The one against the Brumbies a few weeks ago really comes to mind. But then they've also had some really disappointing losses as well. So it has been a bit of a roller coaster for Rebels fans. Can they get over the Reds? It's going to be really interesting. It's going to depend on which Rebels side shows up. I watched the Reds-Brumbies game on the weekend, and I think it's fair to say that it was probably a step up in intensity. It was a step up in skill. And the Reds, in my mind, have probably been the most exciting team in this competition because they've really just come from nowhere. It's taken a long time for Brad Thorne to really build this side. It wasn't that long ago that they were only winning 1 or 2 games in Super Rugby. They were the easy beats from everywhere, including teams like the Sunwolves. So they've been exciting to watch. I think it's going to be a really good game, but it is going to depend which Rebels team turns up. They have to bring the intensity from the very, very start, the Rebels.
I would assume that they will be flying in and out on game day like away teams have been doing this year. That makes it really, really tough. If they have an opportunity to come a day early and stay overnight, you'd love them to do that. But I just don't know whether under the current government restrictions with that competition, whether it's a possibility. But hey, they're there. You've got to be in the fight to have a chance, and they're in the fight. So we look forward to that one on Saturday evening. Our final story today, we turn to the NRL. And ahead of the Newcastle Knights clash with the Roosters this week, I think a lot of us were all looking forward to the head-to-head battle between Kalyn Ponga and James Tedesco. In many people's eyes, probably the 2 most exciting and interesting players in the game to watch. However, some disappointing news via Dean Ritchie in the Daily Telegraph as Newcastle Knights head coach Adam O'Brien says that there's a strong likelihood he will actually be resting Kalyn Ponga for this match. He's banged up, he's got a battered nose, black eyes, and he's had multiple whacks around the head this season. He certainly gets targeted by opposition players, and we saw Chad Townsend from Cronulla take him high on the weekend, and he'll find himself in trouble at the judiciary. He's likely to be suspended. He has been, suspended for 3 games for that shoulder charge. Kalyn Ponga, we know he's as per Minaur, he's a little bit pint-sized compared to some of his opponents, but he's an exceptional exponent of the game. Does he need to be better protected by referees? Because we're being robbed here.
Yeah, firstly, I just want to say I'll be very surprised if Kalyn Ponga is actually rested for this game, just quietly. I think that there might be a few mind games going there from O'Brien from the Knights. Can he be protected? I think that you can't make different laws for different players, unfortunately. It's not something you want to see. And, of course, players are going to be targeted. Now, in this case, it certainly wasn't legal, and it blows my mind that we were even debating whether or not Chad Townsend should have been sent off for that hit. I mean, you and I are both rugby people, and if that happened in rugby, you'd probably be suspended for 10 weeks after being sent off immediately. So that was really quite interesting from that perspective. It probably, I don't know if you can protect him any more than what the rules would stipulate. You can patrol it a little bit more closely, but it has to be within the rules, Pete. You can't make new rules for different players, despite how special they are and despite how much we love watching them play.
Yeah, it's a good shout, and not completely dissimilar to Fremantle coach Justin Longmuir asking for a bit more protection for Nat Fyfe in recent weeks in that competition. I like your point, maybe Adam O'Brien playing some games here, of course, coming up against his former employer. He was a very successful assistant coach at the Roosters, a premiership winning assistant coach, and perhaps trying to play some games with his old boss, Trent Robinson. But I think I speak on behalf of all sports lovers when I say I hope we get to see Kalyn Ponga go head-to-head with James Tedesco this week. That's all we've got time for. Fantastic to catch up, and great to have the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff back after that 1-week hiatus. For those of you watching or listening for the first time, thank you so much for getting involved. And, of course, share it, rate it, review it on the podcast app and on the social media channels. Nat, look forward to catching up with you again very soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pete.
Stay safe down there in Victoria. Of course, our thoughts are with all of our mates down in Victoria with that extension of the lockdown. We know that you're doing it extremely tough, and you are in our thoughts. You've been watching the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. We'll see you tomorrow with the Australians' Courtney Walsh.